I'm John Little of OmegaShock.com, and this is the Weekend SHOCKCAST for Saturday, July 19th, 2014. It is going to be very difficult to determine how and why MH17 was shot down. With all of the disinformation agents out there clamoring for our attention with false narratives, it will take time to separate fact from fiction. Even figuring out whether this was deliberate or an accident will take time. Did you notice that the Obama administration wasn't quite ready to cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war? It doesn't mean that the downing of MH17 wasn't deliberate. It's just a sign that Obama wasn't ready and fumbled. We'll see what happens. Whatever comes next, I hear the dogs of war. They are a lot closer than you imagine. As we contemplate what comes next, never forget that God is in control. And he will win this chess match with Satan, and he will do it with consummate skill and grace, and destroy Satan so effectively that we will be amazed at what God has done. Why there is this competition between God and Satan at all is a complete mystery. It is hard for me to imagine a reason for why God would not squish Satan like a bug. However, I am satisfied that God has his reasons and that they are perfect. So, never be in awe of the Illuminati or any of her sisters. They are dim-witted monkeys playing with matches in a bomb factory, and rarely do their plans work out as they wanted them to. When the British elites wanted the southern part of North America settled first, colonists were blown off course, forcing them to establish themselves in what we now call Rhode Island, one of the few places where religious liberty flourished in the colonies. When the Illuminati were building their organization and laying the groundwork for the takeover of the earth, one of their messengers was struck by lightning, exposing their satanic conspiracy to the world. When Hitler was planning his own global takeover, he needed to defeat Russia and almost succeeded, but he was forced to delay his invasion of Russia by 4 vital weeks, because foolish Mussolini invaded Greece and the Greeks were tearing up Germany's Italian allies. Those 4 weeks lost him the war, because his army was caught in the open when the Russian winter came. God often uses little things to defeat Satan. Here's one of my favorite quotes that has its roots all the way back in the 13th century. For want of a nail. For want of a nail the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe the horse was lost. For want of a horse the rider was lost. For want of a rider the message was lost. For want of a message the battle was lost. For want of a battle the kingdom was lost. And all for the want of a horseshoe nail. I've seen God use missing nails in my own life. When I miss the bus, I often find myself meeting someone who needed a kind word or a listening ear. A few mediocre grades in advanced calculus forced me out of physics and into the study of international conflict and finance. 6 years ago, a chance call to a friend on a Thursday led to a small event on Saturday. 3 months later, I found myself married to the most fantastic woman in the world. And then, to my utter amazement, I am here in Taiwan. An offhand comment by my mom led to a YouTube video that caused me to launch this website, and for you to read what you are reading now. When you see how much impact little things have on the course of human events, it is easy to see God at work. As awesome and as powerful as Satan and his minions are, he is completely vulnerable to the loosened bolt, or the elbow nudging the wrong button at the wrong time. I say all that because we are truly on a course for the biggest series of disasters that mankind has ever seen. Billions will die, and you might die as well. But just as God had the land of Goshen prepared for the Israelis that were in slavery in Egypt, God also has a place of safety for us. There really is a way for God's people to survive what is coming. God has always been faithful in providing such places. The question is whether you are able to see what God is doing. If you are caught up in the pleasures of this world, or if you have fallen into the hands of false teachers, you will not see what God is trying to show you. You must clear your head and submit yourselves to the direction of the Holy Spirit. You must examine your life and confess your sins. You must draw close to God. You must read and seek to understand the entirety of the Bible. And you must cast off the false teachers that plague our lives. I was shocked and grieved last night to hear two famous dispensationalist preachers claim that there will be those who will take the mark of the beast and not go to hell, as if they had deleted Revelation 14, verses 9 to 11. How dare they preach this heresy? How dare they? To all who do such things, God has a message for you from Revelation. Quote, "And if any man shall take away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God shall take away his part out of the book of life, and out of the holy city, and from the things which are written in this book." Revelation 22, verse 19. If you dare to commit such abominable heresy, to take away the smallest part of the book of Revelation, I doubt that you are saved. I truly do. Don't show me how holy you are or how famous. I'm not interested in appearance. Show me that you aren't taking away from the book of Revelation. Okay. I run the risk of drifting away from my main point, so let's get back to that. The point is that God is in control. Events will seek to convince you that this is not the case, but step forward in faith. You cannot lose if you submit to God and obey His direction. Are you going to be ready for this? That's a link. Do more than just think about it. So, what did we talk about this week? This week we talked about the events that are leading to the catastrophic destruction of America. America and the Saudis have built up ISIS, and now ISIS has been making moves and consolidating gains. We've also seen moves and counter-moves that remind us of the build-up to World War I and World War II. We also talked about those players who appear to be loose cannons. Anything could happen, and something unexpected did on Thursday, the tragic downing of MH17. It was as if the Illuminati monkeys had lit a match in the bomb factory. So let's talk about that. On Monday, it was Between Now and Disaster, Part 1, the buildup of ISIS. In my series last week, I talked about why and how America might be destroyed, but I mentioned very little about the events leading up to such a cataclysm. This week would be a good time to cover that. There are a fairly common series of moves that governments make before taking their countries to war. We saw this in World War I as European countries jockeyed for position to pick up the pieces of a failing Ottoman Empire. We also saw it in World War II as Japan sought to increase hegemony in the Pacific, and as Germany tried for a Third Reich. And now we get to see it yet again as the U.S. seeks to defend the petrodollar system, and as Russia tries to avoid being crushed by Imperial America. In my petrodollar series that I call Orders from Riyadh, I examine the petrodollar foundations of the American empire. I myself had never really understood all the implications of the petrodollar system before last month. It was an eye-opening experience for myself, and I'm just getting a little tired of having my eyes opened like that. It makes me wonder about what else I've been missing. We'll see. You can bet that you'll hear about it. By the way, you should feel sorry for my poor wife who has to put up with the antics of her shocked and outraged husband every time he stumbles across something awful and outrageous. So we should ask ourselves what Imperial America's next moves will be, and I think that we have a hint about what the U.S. will do by what she has done recently. One thing that the United States did just a few days ago was this. And it's in the video, Swap Deal for Snowden, Russian MP's son kidnapped by U.S. Security Service. That was shocking, and it makes me sick. I have no idea whether the kid was guilty or not, and I'm not sure that it really matters. The point is that this is gasoline on the flames of war. and I am still shocked at how blatant this is. Was there even a warrant out for his arrest? Amazing. So expect to see more of that as the U.S. seeks to build this bonfire higher. But there are a couple of other things that have happened that lead the way towards the future. Ukraine and ISIS. You and my poor wife have already heard me jump up and down in outrage over what the U.S. is doing in Ukraine. What you haven't heard me talk about much is ISIS, also known as the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham. Of course, they've shortened it, all of that, to IS, the Islamic State. There are many organizations like ISIS throughout the Middle East, and I lived next door to some for years when I lived in Israel. ISIS is nothing new. So why is ISIS so successful when the others haven't been? Money. Lots and lots of money. Anyone who has ever studied counterterrorism knows that terrorist organizations require massive amounts of money to succeed in their attempts to terrorize the world. Bases of operation, manpower, security, and weapons require a lot more money than you think, and I have been fascinated for years by the game of terrorism that so many countries play. And you might be surprised at who has been playing these games. We all know about Russia and her support for the PLO and the IRA. We know about UK support for Protestant terrorists in Northern Ireland. We know about French support for terrorism in Africa. And we know about American support for terrorism in South and Central America, and Africa too. But all of that is just the tip of the iceberg. The CIA, along with Turkish and Saudi intelligence agencies, has been deeply involved in supporting the uprising in Syria. They've been training, funding, and arming a bunch of different groups, and they've gone as far as to release dangerous al-Qaeda leaders from jail so that they could take over some of the ragtag outfits that were desperate for good leadership. One of those people released from jail was Ibrahim Awad Ibrahim Ali al-Badri al-Samarai, also known as Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and is the head of ISIS. When he was released by the U.S. in 2009, he turned to Army Colonel Kenneth King and said, "I'll see you guys in New York." Yikes. There is a certain brutal logic to what the CIA is doing by funding and arming all these different terrorist groups in Syria and Iraq. Eventually, one group will survive and thrive. Think of it as a kind of natural selection. Only the brutally smart and efficient will survive to reach the top. Well, it looks like the CIA and the Saudis have the organization that they've been looking for. And they've been pouring money and more money into ISIS as they've become more successful. And ISIS is doing exactly what the CIA wants. But what does the CIA want? Well, there are two things. Another boogeyman. They need another boogeyman to scare citizens around the world into giving up their rights for more security. Osama bin Laden is dead, and this al-Baghdadi guy would make a great replacement. They also need a threat to Saudi Arabia and OPEC. The Saudis and the Persian Gulf Arabs have been flirting with the idea of tearing up the petrodollar system and selling oil in other currencies. The ISIS threat will help keep them from doing that. Originally, I hesitated to treat ISIS seriously because we couldn't be sure that ISIS had a smart enough leadership to consolidate their gains. It now appears that they really have been able to set up a political infrastructure and gather local support in areas that they control. That is the situation now with ISIS. What they do with ISIS in the future will be the important part. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Are you ready for this? On Tuesday, it was Between Now and Disaster, Part 2, ISIS Moves. The mainstream media, or MSM, has been a captured operation for so long, well, I don't even think that our great-grandfathers even experienced real news reporting. And I find that to be an interesting commentary on how much the elites are vulnerable to the population. They can't achieve their aims without our tacit approval. That's why they need the press to mold your views and attitudes, so that you will give them the support that they need. They call this psychological operations, or PSYOP, and it is incredibly effective. And in these last days, the elites are going to step up their PSYOPs to finish the job that they started. When I started to see reports in the mainstream media about how ISIS is planning a new 9/11 style attack, I smelled a rat. A big rat that lives in the CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. In December of last year, I took you through the evidence and background of CIA and Saudi involvement in 9/11. That was a wildly successful operation. Wildly successful. And when you have something that successful, you are going to want to try it again. Of course, the poor, hard-working psychopaths tasked with such a stratagem will have an even harder job this time around, because Americans have already been somewhat desensitized by the first 9/11. So the next 9/11 will need to be bigger and better, to convince a war-weary population to go to war yet again. A bit like a heroin addict that needs an even bigger fix. What will this new 9/11 look like? I don't know, but you will get hints of it in the mainstream media to prime you, and then, boom. 2,977 people died on September 11th, 2001, so it makes you wonder how many will die this time. Whatever happens, it will be much bigger, completely spectacular, and you will be appropriately horrified, and then outraged. Why do you need to be horrified and outraged? Because for the sake of the American empire, we need to go to war again in the Middle East. We will need to go in and take out those awful ISIS people, and anyone else we don't like, as in Syria. I've provided a map of the current area of control by ISIS, and you'll notice to the left is an interesting country. And I provide a map to this country as well. It's Syria. Poor Syria doesn't stand a chance. As I mentioned in my Orders from Riyadh Petrodollar series, Imperial America must maintain monetary control of crude oil production and distribution. And as America's grip on the petrodollar system weakens, America will feel the need to reach out and grab what she wants. And what she wants is Saudi Arabia. I provide a map of Saudi Arabia and surrounding areas, and that area looks pretty big. But the population of the area isn't that much bigger than the population of Taiwan, where I'm living now. In fact, Taiwan would have a good chance of winning if she decided to invade Saudi Arabia. Can you imagine the news reports? In a surprise move today, forward elements of the Taiwan army have invaded the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and are rapidly advancing on the capital of Riyadh. The United Nations Security Council is meeting in emergency session. Okay, so it's a bit ridiculous. But it illustrates how vulnerable Saudi Arabia is to, well, almost anyone. Now, take a moment to compare the Railways of Saudi Arabia map that I showed you with the map of ISIS control, the first one. Did you notice that ISIS is right on the border of Saudi Arabia? It's a good thing that ISIS and Saudi Arabia are in good terms. No, wait, they aren't. There's a headline from 12 days ago. It says, Saudi Arabia places 30,000 soldiers on its border in the wake of ISIS threat after 2,500 Iraqi soldiers quit their posts. I think that the Saudis have gotten a little nervous about the monster they helped create. But they shouldn't worry, because America will come in and defend the Saudis from ISIS. The price, of course, will be the maintenance of the petrodollar system. You can bet that the Saudis will be happy to agree once they've seen the light. There's nothing like a gun to the head to help with seeing light. Of course, all of that will mean another U.S. land invasion of the Middle East. that will leave behind yet another American occupation force in Syria, Iraq, Jordan, and even Saudi Arabia. Does this sound like something that you want to be a part of? The next question is, what will happen between now and this third invasion of the Middle East by the United States? We already talked about a 9/11 redux, and that will get the party started, but America will wait until a huge mess has been made before going in. In fact, America will probably be forced to wait because it takes time for the war drums to have their effect. In the meantime, a couple of things will probably happen. Damascus will be heavily damaged or even destroyed. Israel will go to the defense of Jordan. Israel and Jordan have been quiet allies for a long time, and I wrote about this in many different places. Did you know that Israel went to the defense of the Jordanians in 1972 when Syria was about to invade Jordan? It's true. Without Israel, Jordan would not exist today. And if ISIS invades Jordan, Israel will yet again come to Jordan's defense. How that will play out is hard to say, but it will illustrate to the Middle East that Israel might be a country that the Arabs can trust. More important will be the destruction of Damascus. The final collapse of that city might not happen until after the U.S. invades, but it will be the first time that it has ever been destroyed. And that is where Isaiah 17 comes in. Here is the article that I wrote this April. It's titled Syrian Civil War, Isaiah 17. The process of the complete fulfillment of Isaiah 17 is on its way, and it will be a terrible thing to behold. And we, along with Saudi Arabia and Turkey, will be completely responsible. It is truly an evil thing that we are doing in Syria. By the way, Damascus might still not be destroyed until the coming of Gog and Magog, Ezekiel 38 and Ezekiel 39. When the alliance of Gog and Magog invades the Middle East, everywhere they go will be destroyed, and it is conceivable that Damascus would lie on their invasion path. Now, there is an interesting point to add in here, because America's invasion of the Middle East may lead to this. Quote, "And thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages, and I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, and having neither bars nor gates." Ezekiel 38:11. Having spent a decade and a half there, I know that Israel is one of the most heavily defended places on earth. Gog and Magog would never have a chance against the Israeli army and air force today. Israel is more than capable right now of destroying any army in the world if she wanted to. Taiwan wouldn't stand a chance. But if when America invades and occupies the Middle East, do you think that America will continue to provide military assistance to Israel? Of course not, especially after the United States imposes a peace plan that no one could afford to ignore. It would be Pax Americana. And if Imperial America pulls this off properly, and they will certainly try, no one in the Middle East will feel the need for a military, or will be too terrified of the Americans to even think about it. Of course, there are other ways to render Israel defenseless, but America's reoccupation of the Middle East will bring us closer to the fulfillment of Ezekiel 38. We are now back to last week's series on the destruction of America. If when America is attacked with an EMP weapon, what is the U.S. going to do with all those troops in the Middle East? Take them home if possible, and if they can't make it home, they would be completely without logistical support and sitting ducks for anyone like Iran to take them out. The end result would be a defenseless Israel that would lead to the fulfillment of Ezekiel 38 and 39, the invasion of that grand alliance that we call Gog and Magog. Are you ready for this? On Wednesday, it was Between Now and Disaster, Part 3, Pre-War Maneuvering. In my introduction to this series, I spoke of the maneuvering that happened before World War II. And it's clear to me that we are involved in the same kind of maneuvering now. The problem is that we are in a much, much weaker position vis-a-vis other countries. Before World War II, we were exporting oil and resources to the world. Now we are importing, or having to depend on expensive domestic production. And we are dependent upon foreigners for our power and prosperity. All of that has put us in an exceptionally vulnerable position, a position that Russia will know how to exploit. Most of you did not know that Americans originally wanted no part of World War II. In fact, they didn't even want to be part of World War I. They were sympathetic to the British, but felt that it was a bad idea to get involved in such foreign entanglements. But Americans are an emotional people, and emotional people can be manipulated. That's where the RMS Lusitania came in, a passenger ship purposely loaded with weapons and ammunition so that it would be sunk by the Germans. It was a setup to bring America into World War I. Germany took out advertisements pleading with people not to take the Lusitania from America to Britain. But people ignored their pleading, and 1,198 passengers and crew went to their deaths. When the German U-boat launched her torpedo at the doomed passenger ship, it was the American government that pulled the trigger. The sinking of the Lusitania was murder, plain and simple, by the U.S., and divers recently found evidence that the Germans were right. The Lusitania was running guns. Whoever set up that operation has the blood of the passengers of the Lusitania on his hands, as well as the 204,002 Americans killed in World War I. It was murder, and our great-great-grandfathers were manipulated into participating. Then there was World War II. Roosevelt wanted a third term, and his New Deal was failing, so he tried the Lusitania option, and Hitler refused to take the bait. At the same time, Roosevelt was provoking the Japanese. The Japanese repeatedly tried to find some way to maintain peace with America, but America was determined to drag Japan into war with the U.S. American cryptographers had broken Japanese diplomatic and naval codes, which enabled them to manipulate the Japanese into war. It was also why they knew of the attack on Pearl Harbor ahead of time, and why all U.S. aircraft carriers were away from Pearl Harbor when the attack came. Roosevelt got his war, and 420,000 Americans died. For a fascinating analysis on this run-up to World War II, there's a great video from the Ludwig von Mises Institute, and it's titled, How U.S. Economic Warfare Provoked Japan's Attack on Pearl Harbor, by Robert Higgs. You can find the video in the article. The text of the above speech can be found in a link that I provide. It literally makes me sick to think about the evil that we were tricked into participating in. Were Japan and Germany awful? Of course. Did they need to be taken down? Of course. But Americans helped put Hitler in power in the first place. Just take a good hard look at the activities of Prescott Bush, George Bush Sr.'s father. And Japan would not have been desperate for raw materials if we hadn't been blocking Japan from getting them. Would there still be wars if the scum that we call politicians hadn't been tricking us into them? Probably. But with less loss of life and far, far less blood of innocents upon our hands. We let these people of uncertain parentage take over, so I'm not sure that the blood washes off. And I just love this lying through his teeth quote from Roosevelt. Quote, Our national determination to keep free of foreign wars and foreign entanglements cannot prevent us from feeling deep concern when ideals and principles that we have cherished are challenged. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. By the way, the phrase foreign entanglements comes from FDR, not Washington. Now, let's look at what is happening now. The U.S. tried another Lusitania strategy by staging a coup in Ukraine, but Russia didn't take the bait. So the U.S. tried other avenues to push Russia into a corner, which caused Russia to start looking for allies. How do we see that? The development of the BRICS and BRICS Bank. Did you notice the deals that Russia has been making lately? Here are some moves by Russia. Russia forgives 90% of Cuban debts. Investment deals in South America. Russian military bases in Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. Selling better and cheaper weapons to Iraq. $400 billion pipeline deal with China. Recent moves towards the BRICS Development Bank. Of course, the CFR and the U.S. State Department didn't really like all that. So how has America responded? Well, check out what our beloved leaders are up to. Kidnapping children of Russian politicians. Attacking Russian bank accounts. Attacking financial centers where Russia does her banking. If you look closely at all of this and more, you will see an attempt by America to start yet a third world war. Why would America want another world war? Let me answer that with another question. Have you noticed how much moral damage was sustained by American society during and after these wars? I have, and it's profoundly disturbing. After each war, we found ourselves having drifted further and further away from God. Have you noticed how many freedoms we lost as we fought each war? I have, and I am horrified. We would not be in the predicament that we are in today were it not for all the wars that we have fought over the past century and the moral decay that followed. We have suffered through a century of unending war, and it has destroyed us. When the final missiles take us out, all they will do is sift the rubble of a long-dead society. As we abandoned God, is it any wonder that He has abandoned us? Welcome to the end of the world. Are you ready for this? On Thursday, it was Between Now and Disaster, Part 4, Loose Cannons. As the pressure builds towards war, events can occur that ignite conflict in a way that was unplanned. We've seen this throughout history, and we often focus on these events that come from left field, without realizing their source. When history records the start of World War III, everyone will focus on some rather minor incident rather than the cause. Something will happen, like a match igniting a fuse that will blow up the world. We will concentrate on the match, but matches don't explode. That's what bombs do. I've already talked about the bombs that have been carefully laid out, ready for the right moment for the global elites to set them off. But more than just the elites have a match, and we often refer to these kinds of people as loose cannons. When people talk about the reason for World War I, they usually refer to the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. Would it surprise you to know that his death was not the cause of World War I? Well, that's because of something called popular history. Popular history is a fictionalized version of the past written by the victors of war. It has some truth to it, but it's not the truth. But I'll chase that rabbit another time. The point about World War I was the Ottoman Empire. It was crumbling, and the countries of Europe each wanted a piece of that delicious pie. Furthermore, they also knew that the first one to jump would get the biggest piece. So everyone was eyeing each other as they jockeyed for the best position, and everyone was looking for the right moment to launch their war. Believe it or not, but everyone studies World War I if they are serious about the study of nuclear war strategy. It is the best real-world nuclear scenario that we have. The first to launch their attack would have had the greatest chance of survival and the best chance of getting what they wanted. And the pre-war arms race was a mirror image of the nuclear arms race of the Cold War. So when a young Serbian nationalist came out of the crowd, stepped up to the Austrian Archduke's automobile, reached in and shot Franz Ferdinand, that was not the cause. That was the match. To put it another way, the Serbians were the loose cannon. What loose cannons do we have sliding about the deck of our ship? By the way, loose cannon refers to the days of sailing ships when cannons were secured by rope or chain. Should a cannon slip out of its restraints, it would roll about the deck of a ship in an unpredictable way, killing and injuring men and the ship, as the waves tossed everything about. Unfortunately, we have one really big one that threatens to sink the ship: Islamic radicals. Now, not all Islamic radicals can be classified as loose cannons. The most successful radicals wear a leash and have been well paid to stand where they are. In fact, quite a few of these Islamic radicals might not be Muslim at all. For instance, we've caught CIA and MI6 guys wearing keffiyehs, posing as Muslims, and shooting up the neighborhood. The thing about Islamic radicals is that they have a bad habit of reading the Quran and doing things their own way. Once you've given these guys weapons and money, well, it's hard to tell who they will go after. I mention all of this because of a video that I listened to last night. I got it from Steve Quayle, and he picked it up from Lynn Liaz. Lynn got it from Leading Edge Radio in an interview with Tosh Plumlee by Keith Harden in the first week of July. I include the interview in the article, and it's titled, "Former CIA Agent Reveals Startling Information." I also provide a link to the article on Before It's News. Tosh Plumlee reveals quite a bit of information about Islamic radicals that are streaming across the border from Mexico. How many of them are planning terrorist attacks on a shoestring budget? Attacks that even the global elites can't anticipate. Remember that it doesn't take a rocket scientist to build a bomb. Someone trained properly could do so with common ingredients. More importantly, do we have a fifth column army of insurgents crossing the border? As the global New World Order elites put their plans into operation, as they struggle with each other over who will control the world, do they understand what these loose cannons could be doing? It's an interesting thought, and there are more loose cannons than just Islamic terrorist wannabes. There are all kinds of people who should have pushed this button instead of that. Mail gets delivered to wrong addresses, and phone calls don't get picked up. Meetings don't happen when they should. Secrets get whispered to the wrong person. Lots of little things happen to mess up plans and stratagems. Lots of things. Worse, I don't think that the Illuminati really know what they're doing. They're really just dim-witted monkeys playing with matches while cannons roll about loose on deck. But there is someone who does know what he's doing. So let's talk about God tomorrow. Are you ready for this? On Friday, it was Between Now and Disaster, Part 5, The Monkeys Light a Match. I was going to write about how God intervenes in the evil plans of the Illuminati, but hours after I wrote yesterday's piece, someone shot down MH17. My first thought was that God had indeed intervened in the conflict in Ukraine, but I wanted to wait for developments. Those developments were waiting for me when I woke up this morning here in Taipei. There is something sinister surrounding this event, and I think that it's clear to me that the Illuminati monkeys in the bomb factory have lit a match. Tomorrow will be a great opportunity to show how God joggles the elbows of the Illuminati monkeys while sticking a thumb in the eye of Lucifer. There are a series of circumstances that led to the downing of MH17. Some of those circumstances are normal to modern warfare. Unfortunately, there are some unholy details that should make you question the mainstream narrative. But let's go over the normal stuff first. In conflicts such as this, there's always an escalation phase. One side brings in a weapon to counter the weapon of another side. The other side evades the new weapon and provides a different weapon. The first side brings in yet another weapon, and on and on and on. When Kiev launched its attack on the separatist Novorossiya movement, or federal state of Novorossiya, Ukraine's government sent in troops via aircraft and helicopter. and they started using helicopter gunships. The separatists responded with shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles. When these man-portable air defense systems, or MANPADS, entered the conflict, Ukraine responded by different tactics, which included high-altitude flights. MANPADS only have a range of 13,000 feet, so transports and bombers flying over that air altitude were safe. So that's what they did. The separatists responded by bringing in an air defense system called the BUK missile system. It's an old system, but good enough to take down the aging transport planes and bombers of the Ukrainian Air Force. In fact, that is possibly what they had done just the day before when they shot down an Su-25 on Wednesday. Then yesterday, when the separatists of Donetsk saw a rather large blip on their radar screen, on a course to overfly their position, they assumed that it was an Antonov An-26 of the Ukrainian Air Force. So they shot it down. Unfortunately, they were wrong. It was Malaysia Airlines flight MH17. The other problem is that the crews manning the BUK missile system were probably not highly experienced operators, especially if the equipment was an older version coming from a Ukrainian military depot. That part explains how this was an accident. But there are murkier details that point to something far more sinister. The first problem arises when you see how fast that the Ukrainian government in Kiev sent out their evidence, quote-unquote, that it was the Russian separatists that shot down MH17. It was late at night here in Taipei, and I was surprised at how fast they came out with a audio recording of what happened. But there's a problem with their recording. It was created the day before the plane was shot down. I provide a screenshot of creation details of the Ukrainian evidence, quote-unquote. And then we have Anton Gerashenko, advisor to Ukraine Ministry of Internal Affairs, press release statement just 30 minutes after the crash. Do you smell a rat? But there's more. Now we find out the MH17 had diverted from its normal flight corridor. Why was MH17 flying a path that diverged from its normal routine flight pattern? When you add the fact that the pilots of MH17 were in continual contact with Ukrainian air traffic control, you start to consider the worst. It appears that the downing of this plane isn't quite the accident that it appears to be. I provide a picture from the dailymail.co.uk that indicates that the flight patterns of the aircraft in the area were completely avoiding Ukraine. If every other aircraft was avoiding Ukraine, why did Ukrainian air traffic controllers instruct MH17 to fly over the airspace that they knew was dangerous, an airspace that had already shot down an airplane the day before? To add one more ominous point, there's this from Russia Today. It's titled, Reports that Putin Flew Similar Route as MH17. Vladimir Putin was flying home on part of the same route as MH17, about 30 minutes ahead of the doomed Malaysian Boeing 777. Could this have been an assassination attempt? I seriously doubt it, but you can imagine how people will start to connect the dots here. We also have this report, quote, This Kiev air traffic controller is a citizen of Spain and was working in Ukraine. He was taken off duty as a civil air traffic controller along with other foreigners immediately after a Malaysia Airlines passenger aircraft was shot down over the eastern Ukraine, killing 295 passengers and crew on board. The air traffic controller suggested in a private evaluation and basing it on military sources in Kiev that the Ukrainian military was behind this shootdown. Radar records were immediately confiscated after it became clear a passenger jet was shot down, from eTurbo News via InfoWars. Unfortunately, we can't know at this moment if it's true. By the way, my hat is off to Dabu7 for pointing out the problems with the events surrounding the downing of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17. He did a good job explaining some of the suspicious elements surrounding this situation. He got me pointed in the right direction, and I appreciate that. Good job, Justin. As I said yesterday, as MH17 was loading up and getting ready to take off, quote, as the global New World Order elites put their plans into operation, as they struggle with each other over who will control the world, do they understand what these loose cannons could be doing? It's an interesting thought, and there are more loose cannons than just Islamic terrorist wannabes. There are all kinds of people who should have pushed this button instead of that. Mail gets delivered to wrong addresses and phone calls don't get picked up. Meetings don't happen when they should. Secrets get whispered to the wrong person. Lots of little things happen to mess up plans and stratagems. Lots of things. Worse, I don't think that the Illuminati really know what they're doing. They're really just dim-witted monkeys playing with matches while cannons roll around loose on deck. But there is someone who does know what he's doing. Let me repeat that last bit. But there is someone who does know what he's doing. That someone is God, and I wanted to talk about him today. But I think that it's appropriate to defer to God's plans tomorrow as I try to do a weekend wrap-up of this series, which is what you're listening to now. The monkeys have lit a match, but God is in control. Are you ready for this? That's a link. Do more than just think about it. This has been the Weekend Shockcast for Saturday, July 19th, 2014. I'm John Little of OmegaShock.com.